Hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the To-Do List. I am your host, Eric Fisher, and this week is a little personal. I'm talking with Christin Taylor, who is an old college friend of mine, and she has written a book called Shipwrecked in L.A., Finding Purpose in a Life Adrift. Now, this is more theoretical when it comes to productivity. If you're listening to this for tips and tricks, you'll hear some, but this is going to be more about dealing with seasons of change in life, as well as, maybe dealing with a quarter-life crisis or even a cyclical type crisis, dealing with your identity. And I believe it's important for us to talk about that and deal with that when it comes to doing the work we're supposed to do, because it's not just about doing the work that we're supposed to do. It's also about doing the things and doing the work and the career and calling that we want to do and then we know we're supposed to do. And if you've listened to any of the other interviews previously, you know that for a number of those interviewees, they either quit their jobs and moved into an entrepreneurial type status, like, for example, Cliff Ravenscraft, or were fired, like Pat Flynn. And I think you can admit they're both pretty successful. So anyway, I probably share a little bit more personal information about myself in this one than I have in some of the previous ones. Nothing so jarring that it's crazy, but I really hope you enjoy this interview and decide to check out Christin's book. This week, it is a little bit different for me. This interview is different because I'm welcoming Christin Taylor to the show, and she and I are alumni of actually my current workplace, Indiana Wesleyan University, and we were friends in college. And so this is a little bit different. I might share some more personal stuff than you might be used to. Anyway, welcome to the show, Christin.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here.
So your book, the official title, what is the official title?
The official title is Shipwrecked in L.A., Finding Purpose and Meaning When Your Dreams Crash.
I read the book. The mainstream term that's used to describe what this book is talking about is a quarter-life crisis. And some people would wonder, well, why would you talk about a quarter-life crisis on a productivity podcast? The reason that I call this show Beyond the To-Do List, but then added the tagline, Personal Productivity Perspectives, is so that I'd be able to have people tell their stories, and that in that way, people would be able to enter in and maybe apply other people's experiences to their own. So I really kind of see this as being a more theoretical episode, but I think we're going to get to some really practical stuff. So,
yeah, good.
So what is Shipwrecked about?
Shipwrecked is about the shipwreck that we hit in our 20s when we call into question everything we think we know about ourselves, about the world around us, about our faith, if we choose to have a faith choice. And it's the process by which we start to make new meaning out of that. So it also tells my personal story of, I went out to LA right out of college with my husband, Dwayne, believing that I was called to be a missionary to Hollywood. I had spent some time at IWU, they have a study abroad program, and I had gone out to film school in LA. I worked at Nickelodeon Movies and felt like this was really where I was meant to be for my life. And so then after we got married, Dwayne and I moved back to LA. And about 8 weeks after I got there, everything I thought I understood about my calling, my sense of purpose, direction came crashing down around me. And I spent the next 4 years trying to figure out then what on earth I was supposed to do with myself and where I was going. So that's what the book is about. It's not just my story, but also I weave in research from young adult identity scholars about the fact that I'm not the only one that this happens to. This happens to a lot of us in our 20s and even into our early 30s. And this is actually a new stage of human development that they have been researching for the last 10 or 15 years. And so I really wanted to bring that to the table and share my story, but then also help readers see, you know what, this might be exactly the narrative that's happening to you. Let me give you a language for a vocabulary for what you're experiencing. You're not the only one.
Yeah. When you say, 20s and 30s, are we saying that this isn't going to be applicable to anybody past that point in time?
Well, I think I think we're always on a chart for growth. We're always changing. But no, this research is really, really pertains to 18 to 34-year-olds because there have been social and economic changes in the last 30, 40, 50 years that have created this new stage of human development. And Jeffrey Jensen Arnett has really spearheaded the research on this, talking about how a shift from an industrial-based economy to an information-based economy has put a new emphasis on higher education. So now people aren't just graduating from high school and go and getting, the job at the factory that will pay them benefits and allow them to afford a house, and then they can get married and have a career. No, now we have to go get our BAs, and now our BAs aren't enough. Now we have to get our MAs, and now our MAs aren't enough. Now we have to get a PhD. And so there's a way in which adulthood is kind of getting postponed. There's a changing timetable of adulthood is what they're calling it. And so that's one of the factors that created this changing timetable of adulthood. There's a couple other reasons why we're in a unique stage of history that 20-somethings are facing things they've never had to face before.
Yeah, I was going through that and I kept thinking, this sounds right. It feels like partially what I experienced in that same time frame, because I think you're like, a year younger than me. Even now, I feel as I was reading through this that like there's some remnant type pieces of driftwood, I'll use that I'm still dealing with from this period of time where, there just wasn't things that were figured out in this point in time, this transition to adulthood. So what are those what have been seen as the traditional transition points or phases, or how do you know, in other words, that you're transforming from an adult teen into like an adult person?
Yeah. Well, traditionally, they sort of point to 5 pillars. 1, graduating. 2, getting married. 3, finding a career. 4, owning a house. 5, having children. Not necessarily in that order, but the psychologists and developmental theorists have kind of agreed that these were the 5 sort of pillars of adulthood, and they used to happen. They believed that they happened in quicker succession. I think if you really look at it now, it's all over the place. I mean, it happens much later. One of the reasons being that higher education is now open to women. So women are going back to school and they don't need a man to have a place in society anymore. We can get our degrees. And so a lot of us are saying, I don't want to have kids until later. I don't want to settle down and have a family until later. And so, Jeffrey Jensen Arnett, I refer to him again, he did some research in 2000 and showed that the median age of marriage in the 60s was like 22 for women, 23 for men. And now I think as of 2000, it was 26 for women, 27 for men. I would argue it's probably even later now in 2013. It's probably more like in the early 30s, late 20s. So, so those sorts of things have stretched out these 5 pillars. Are kind of happening in sort of a not haphazard, but just they're not falling in lockstep fashion anymore. They're kind of happening in a different timetable and a different speed.
So, in other words, the pattern that you used to follow in this season of life, as you were transitioning from 18 into 30-something, that the pattern is kind of broken, or not necessarily broken, just kind of shifted, and that there have been some things that have caused that shift.
And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a great thing. What's created is more time for us to figure ourselves out. I think part of the and this is just me hypothesizing. I don't have any research to back this up. But I think the reason why the midlife crisis was so huge back in the day was because people didn't have time to face that. They were, graduating, getting married, jumping into their lives full swing. And then it wasn't until they were 40 or 50 when their kids go back to school, when suddenly they had time to kind of step back and say, well, what am I doing with my life? And I think this new sort of phase of development that's come about has created the time for us to really recenter and kind of figure out, where are we going? We can, Jennifer Tanner talks about, we have time to sort of find out like, well, do I like this job or do I not? Do I want to try this job? Do I like this relationship or not? Maybe I want to try this relationship. And then we recenter and we recommit then at a later date when we really settle into, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. This is who I want to, be with for the rest of my life. This is where I want to settle, So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but what I think the trick is that I think culture and society has been a little bit slow to catch on to the fact that there's this new stage of human development that needs a new structure to help support it. And the researchers really look at the early 1900s. At the turn of the 1900s, adolescence didn't exist. But it was around, the early 1900s when they realized, hey, wait a second, these 11 and 12 and 13-year-olds are going through something pretty significant. And that's when they created the term adolescence. And that's when they created junior high. Mm-hmm. The argument now is, well, that same thing happening with young adulthood, and what can we do to help support this new stage of human development? Because so many young adults are graduating from college. They have these huge loans they have to pay off. They can't get full-time jobs that will help pay their cost of living. The new entry-level position is the unpaid internship. So, there's some real needs here that I think we as a society and culture can really be looking to meet in new ways and creative ways. And I think some organizations are doing that, but not everybody.
Yeah. How did you settle, or how did the metaphor of shipwreck come to you to regard this time or season that you lived through?
I really got it straight out of the research. I started writing my story when I was pregnant with Noelle. She's 5 now, so this was 6 years ago. And I just felt like everything I had been through in LA, because I did end up working in the film industry and then choosing to leave. I just felt like this was something a story I needed to share. But the more I wrote it, the more I was like, why will anyone care? This
right.
is just me, little old Christin Taylor. Like, why does anyone care what I did in my 20s? When I was, what year was it? I think it was around 2008. Dwayne decided to go back to get his master's, and he decided to study college counseling and student development. And one night, he was reading this book called Big Questions, Worthy Dreams by Sharon DeLose Parks, who is gracious enough to endorse my book. He was reading through it, and she talked about this term called shipwreck. And she used the term to talk about the thing that triggers in us as 20-somethings the complete dismantling of our identity. And she says there are any number of triggers. It can be a loss of a career. It can be a loss of a relationship. You could be engaged and then you break up, or you could be with someone you think you're going to be with the rest of your life and you break up. It could be an injury. It could be something like the intellectual constructs that you thought were really sound, all of a sudden you realize don't work anymore, and it just completely unravels you, And Dwayne put the book down and he's like, Christin, I think that's what happened to us, because he had gone through his shipwreck too and was still kind of coming to terms with it, as was I. And I was like, that's it. That's what she's talking about. I had never heard anybody put a word to what we had experienced. And then, Eric, it was like I could just go down the line. It was like I could list all of our friends and be like, that's their shipwreck, their shipwreck, their shipwreck. I mean, it was like all of us were hitting these shipwrecks. And I think we all were feeling like failures. We were feeling like we were maybe going a little bit crazy. We were feeling like we were the only ones, But that term suddenly turned on this light. And I was like, oh, we're normal. This is normal. And so I was like, that's what I need to write about. I need to bring this into this isn't just about me. This is about something larger that's going on that I want other people to have a vocabulary for, just like I was giving a vocabulary for it.
And so then throughout the course of the book, you're going back and forth between the narrative of your story as well as interjecting at key points this research. And to be honest, and I think you're familiar with him, that's what gave it very much a Blue Like Jazz, Donald Miller feel to me as I read it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm honored.
So,
Yeah.
well, there you go. And that really, I mean, because it kept going back and forth between that, and it was, his whole thing about Blue Like Jazz is that God is like jazz music. He doesn't resolve. It's not, some easy answer thing, and I really love that. And then it even felt again like, what's his other book? The one that's A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, and I might be swapping terms there, but that's the one where he talks about screenwriting, the process of Blue Like Jazz, the movie, and it's not only going through a process of how they wrote that, but then also like the narrative of a story of him changing his life, the character of himself in his own life, trying to make himself more exciting in his real life because of that. And I hope to have Donald on the show someday. But anyway, he can explain it better than me then.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's excellent. Excellent. Yeah.
So I say that because I know a number of people have read that book. This is very much, for me at least, this was very much a similar style, especially because I know that you use what's funny is I think that you can tell me if this is true or not. I think that you have taken what you learned from film school, the art of film and technique and all that, and have kind of applied that to the way you use words when writing to paint, to touch on the emotions using different and the mind using all the different sensory elements that you can conjure with the words you're using.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
Eric, when I'm writing, I want it to unfold in front of the reader as if they're watching it on film. I want them to feel it, to see it, to hear it. I don't want to just tell them, well, this is what happened to me when I was working at the film financing company. I want them to be there in that moment, experiencing it with me. So, I'm so glad that you got that, because that was absolutely what I was trying to do.
Yeah. And actually, one of the moments was, because you're doing that, really just, I had to put the book down because you met somebody who was, indirectly very influential during my early years in, junior high, Jonathan Frakes.
Yes.
Which I was like, no way. No way you met Jonathan Frakes. And for people that don't know, which you all should, Jonathan Frakes was Captain Will Riker on Star Trek The Next Generation. And he was working in your office when you were an intern. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a surreal moment for me. That was sort of the first moment where I was like, whoa, I'm in Hollywood. I had sort of been floating around. It was my first day interviewing at Nickelodeon Movies for the internship, and I really floated into the office on a bubble. I just was so enamored with the glamour of being on the Paramount lot and all these iconic, sort of places on the lot that you see in movies. And I was waiting for my interview, and then this guy walked through the foyer in this Hawaiian shirt and khaki shorts or cargo shorts, and he was so kind, and he smiled at me, and he said hi, and he had these, this beard and these bright blue eyes, and it was because I was so out of place, I couldn't place him. I felt like, and I think I say in the book, I had just met my uncle all of a sudden in the middle of Nickelodeon Movies, and so. Then afterwards, I asked, once, they gave me the internship, Allie, the lady that had hired me, she said, do you have any questions? And I said, yeah, who was that guy that just walked through? And she goes, oh, that's Jonathan Frakes, Captain Riker. And I was like, whoa, because at the time that Star Trek The Next Generation came out, we were living in England at the time. My family were missionaries over there, and I just remember clear as day. Every day I would come home from school, or I think it was once a week it aired. And I would get my ice cream from the ice cream truck, and I would sit down and I would watch Star Trek: The Next Generation. And I mean, Jonathan Frakes was as much a part of my week as some of my friends at school. Mm-hmm. So it was a surreal moment for me where, sort of. These ideals and dreams came crashing into reality, and I was like, I'm here. This is what I have dreamed about since I was 12 years old, working in the film industry, and I'm here, So, yeah, it was a significant moment for me.
Yeah, again, part of why it shocked me was because he was very much a part of my life when I was young, because my family would do our kind of a ritual where even from the very first, I don't know how long it lasted, but the very first time they aired Next Generation, we would get, it was a Saturday night for us in the States at that time, and we would sit down with Little Caesar's Pizza, and we would eat that, and we would watch Star Trek, and it just we did it the first time, and then it was like, hey, let's do it again, and we just kept doing it. And then I don't know that everybody I know that we didn't keep doing that forever, but I know that I particularly watched that show straight through till its end run. And I think, let's see, it was like 2 years ago, I actually went through the entire series again on Netflix.
Oh, that's such a good idea.
Yeah, and I realized there was literally maybe 2 episodes that I had never seen. And I don't know why I hadn't seen them, but I had seen them all, and I remembered them as I was going through them, even though I'd only ever seen them like once.
Well, and it's so funny because, I mean, how many years after that show did I see him? I mean, when did the show end?
Right. 94.
Okay, so this was 2001. I was there at Nickelodeon Movies. And Eric, he looked the same. I mean, he had the same beard and everything. Like, sometimes actors, when they're not on a show, their appearance, they do their own thing. But he still had that Captain Riker look,
Yeah. Yeah, he pretty much stayed the same. And this is way too long of a William Riker tangent, but that's okay. He, from the point he kind of landed physical feature-wise at the end of the television series and even into the 3 or 4 movies that they did, he pretty much stayed the same. In fact, I've seen pictures recently because he directs episodes of 2 shows that I watch, Leverage, which just ended, and Burn Notice, which I love. Anyway, So you had a lot of different strange experiences like that. Not just kind of, you had, coming from, Marion, little old Marion, Indiana to Hollywood, you not only you had your, culture shock there, but then you're starting to work in the film industry a little bit and kind of coming up in roadblocks. You and your husband, Dwayne, are figuring out, okay, how do we make this work job-wise, what's expected of us, what do you really want to, what you really want to do, but you're not quite sure how to do what you really want to do, or at least it's what you thought you wanted to do, and you haven't really tested it yet.
Yeah.
And you kind of go through a bunch of different, ups and downs and stories, and I want to ask, how would somebody maybe identify if they're not necessarily in an age range, even maybe they are in the age range that typically the shipwreck is part of life these days. How would they maybe sense that they are in a shipwreck or dealing with, pieces of one later on? Is there kind of emotional cues or just thoughts that they might have?
Yeah, I think without getting too, sort of academic on you, there are definitely signs. I think as an outsider looking in, the things that we're going through are, first of all, we're beginning to see that the world is a lot more complex and nuanced than we had thought. So, some of these things that we've held true begin to shake up beneath us. And that can be really unnerving, especially, for people who were raised in the church, for their parents and for them to start to feel like they're questioning their faith, they're questioning this worldview that their family has given them. But that is a really typical stage of young adult identity development. And usually the shipwreck is what triggers that starting to rethink things. The other thing that you start to realize when you're in your shipwreck is that knowledge is, and again, I don't want to be too academic, so I'll give you the academic side and then I'll give you the personal side. How's that?
Sure.
The academic side. So you're beginning to see the world as more complex and more nuanced than you had originally thought. The other thing you're starting to realize is that knowledge is socially constructed, right? Like this is not, this is something that we can decide as a group what we're going to think and believe about certain things, even about the Bible. I mean, like how many different people, there are lots of different denominations that interpret it different ways, right?
Oh, yeah.
This can be a really, this can be, I was just talking to my cousin about this, who's looking at studying biblical studies, and he's like, I'm a little bit nervous because, he's like, I'm going to start reading things that are going to make me question how I've originally thought about even my interpretation of Scripture. Again, this is a really typical sort of young adult development stage, and it's a healthy one, and it's a good one. Because ultimately, you have to move to a place of personal conviction in the middle of all of that. And all of the young adult identity scholars talk about you don't want to stay in a place of cynicism and relativism, whether you are a person of faith or not, because it may not be faith for you that's shaken up. It could be something else. It could be your ideas about relationships, ideas about the way your parents raised you, or the way your coaches coached you, or whatever, or what you thought about any number of subjects you're studying. But ultimately, you don't want to stay in this place of cynicism and relativism. You want to move through to a place of personal conviction. So how do you figure out how to find that personal conviction amidst all these questions? And then sort of another phase is where you start to realize that you, as a person, can have an internal compass that helps you decide these things. And so ultimately, Shipwreck is triggering this change for us of moving from really living our life according to the outside voices around us that have been so good for us until that point, that have kept us on track and helped us grow up. But then in our young adult years, we need to really step back from those and be like, okay, I've got to move towards an inner sense of direction here that's going to help me make my decisions. And I can still use what my parents taught me, and I can still use what my mentors and my coaches, taught me, but I'm going to start to look at them a bit different and decide what I want to keep and what I want to let go. So that's like the academic side of signs of what's going on in shipwreck and how you know you're in a shipwreck. From a personal standpoint, you just are freaked out. Like, if you're feeling panicked and freaked out, you're probably going through a shipwreck, right? Like, if you feel like the world is just turned upside down, you're probably going through a shipwreck, because it really is what you feel like, everything that has held you together until that point. I mean, at the risk of sounding a little melodramatic, when I hit my shipwreck, I really felt like a piece of me died. I was like, what do I do now? I was like, I don't know what direction. I have spent my whole life dreaming about this. Now what do I do with myself? I've studied for this. This is all I've ever planned on. Now what am I supposed to do with myself? And I remember just feeling a lack of direction and a lack of sense of what I was supposed to do with myself. I really felt like I was, to continue the metaphor, floating around on the open seas with all the debris around me.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question at all. It's a great question. Yeah.
Well, I can, as I was reading and you were using from the personal side of things, because I hadn't really thought about the academic side of things prior to reading this, honestly, other than some of the industrial-based economy to information-based society stuff, which, I have to reference the fact that a number of the people that I've interviewed previously for the show are all entrepreneurial type people who have, I know, gone through this, whether they know that's what they've done or not. It has happened to them because they've either, been fired or quit or been dissatisfied with and finally started dealing with their true self and figuring it out, as they go, and have moved on and are now just having a quality of life, or at least a clarity of calling, maybe.
Yes.
That they didn't have before. And I want to stress that's where some of this theoretical moves into the practical, is the fact that you can have, again, the show's called Beyond the To-Do List for a reason. Is I don't want to just talk about, okay, it's the stuff you need to do, as well as it's about the work you want to do. Yeah. And not, so.
There's so much hope in this. The sort of the crux of the title and what got me going into the research is pretty dismal, this idea of shipwreck. But ultimately, the reason why I wrote this book is because there is deep joy and gladness on the other side of shipwreck, because the new reality that you step into is so much richer than anything you could have imagined before. And, Sharon Delos-Parks talks about the fact that even though what we gain doesn't somehow nullify the pain of shipwreck, we wouldn't trade the pain away, because we don't want to settle for a lesser version of reality. And I think for me, I remember that moment of joy that just swept over me after going through my shipwreck, because ultimately I ended up working in the film industry, which I write about in the book, and I left. And I ended up teaching writing at the college level, and I had Noelle. And I remember this one day, at the time I was, teaching at two different private Christian schools in Los Angeles, and I had Noelle with me, and I was it was on a day that I wasn't teaching class, and Noelle and I were coming back from a play date. And I remember driving up the freeway, and it just like swept over me as I looked in the mirror and I saw this beautiful little girl, waving her chubby little hands at me. And I thought about how I had never realized that this was the life I could have. I could teach and write and be a mother all at the same time. And I had found a really great balance of those two things, and how all of those things, it connected for me at a really deep place that played off of my strengths, played off of things that I was really interested in. And, I didn't have that vision of my life when I was in college. I didn't know that that was possible, that I could do that. I didn't know that that was something to strive for. But ultimately, my shipwreck set me on a course to get there. And for me, it was so much more than just finding the right career, because now I'm still teaching, still being a mom, still writing. But for me, it was so important to hit the shipwreck because there were significant misconceptions I had about myself and the world around me that needed to be dismantled, absolutely. And I would never have moved into that place of real depth and fullness of life until I looked at those skeletons head on, and I got rid of them, and I destroyed them and reconstructed a new, healthier version of myself and the world around me. And ultimately, that's what shipwreck does for us. Is it sweeps out the corners of our lives, and it's a very painful thing, but it then sets us up to then start making a new sense of purpose and meaning in the world that's much richer than anything we could have done before with these sort of faulty premises and foundations.
And that, I think, is where I would kind of transition, and I'll share another personal thing, is for those people who think, well, maybe I did already experience this, or for some that maybe haven't ever experienced this, one of the things, it's imperative, like you said, that we accept the pain, that we take the, whatever form this takes, that, yeah, like you said, facing those skeletons and actually dealing with them. And, for example, for myself, that's actually something that I'm currently doing. And I'm not going to go into specifics, but some people know I had decided to take a season of the show off, or not a season, but a break in between what I called seasons. And we just started season 2 again. And there was a reason for that built in ahead of time. What I didn't realize was that there were plans made for me in that break of time off that I didn't know were going to be plans that I was going to have to deal with. And so, now I'm even now, as I'm going to be turning in like 6 weeks or so, turning 35, which is past supposedly the age for a shipwreck, according to, research or whatever. I still have remnant issues that because I either pushed them down or didn't deal with it or whatever, wasn't equipped to, any of the above, I'm still working on them. And the thing is that I actually don't have, it's going to be hard work and there's a lot of work to be done to deal with them. Yeah. But I don't have fear, I have hope. And I have kind of a security in knowing, you know what, this is going to work out fine. Yeah, there's some heavy lifting to do, but it'll be done.
Yes. So. Yeah, and the other key is really finding good company for yourself and for ourselves when we're going through that. And I think that's something I talk a little bit about in the book, but the Wesleyan Publishing House asked me to write a second book about, is how do you find good company and how do you be good company? Because that is so key to really navigating the shipwrecks and navigating what you're going through now. And I think we probably need good company for our entire lives.
Right.
These are not the thing that's interesting about good company is they're not mentors. They're not people that stand ahead of us and necessarily know more than us and have more power than us. They're people that actually walk behind us and push us forward when we are resistant to being challenged and looking at things head on, but are also there to catch us when what we're looking at gets too heavy for us to bear on our own. They're really unique. They fit a really unique role in society. And I think most often good company comes in the form of our peers, of our friends. again, some of the research I'm doing on good company right now is good company simultaneously challenges and supports us, simultaneously pushes us to really work through these things on our own, but also know that we need to be connected to community in order to have the support we need to be healthy. And so I think, it's so interesting that you bring that, because I think, I was talking to another researcher. Her name is Marcia Baxter McGolda, who's another lady that I really reference a lot in the book. And she was saying that new research is coming out now that's saying that we don't hit, the shipwreck and then finding purpose and meaning all in a linear fashion, but that it's really cyclical. And so what you're saying doesn't surprise me at all. I think that's an experience for a lot of us, that we hit shipwreck and then we sort of come back around and revisit it again and then move out and then come back around. And there's a way in which we're sort of working through the layers of it, and that you're probably, you hit your shipwreck a while ago, but are now sort of circling back around and working with, dealing with another layer of it and then coming back out again. And that's also really a true way that people are experiencing this whole journey right now. It's not linear. It doesn't fall it doesn't fall in one right after the other.
Right. If I think about it that way, then I'd have to probably be honest and say that this is probably my third shipwreck.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. And that's the other thing too. You can hit, unfortunately, we can hit more than one shipwreck. Good news for us.
Yay. Oh.
Yay.
Yeah, and actually I was going to say that because I want to move into a little bit more of the process of writing the book, because obviously that happened after the fact of the book, where the book leaves off in your life. I know a little bit more where we kind of reconnected once the advent of social media happened and Facebook, and everybody was like, hey, college friends and all that. I started reading your blog, and you were consistently blogging, so I knew some of what was going on there, and I knew had started already writing. You just didn't have the academic portion like Dwayne suggested to add to it. What was the process? Like when you were writing the book, your daughter Noelle was a couple years old, something like that, and you were teaching too. How did you balance all that?
Yeah, well, and I just to tag off on the last question you said, I think where the book leaves off is sort of, there was still more processing happening for me even after that. And so I think, even now I'm still, even last year, I was still processing so much of what had happened in my 20s. So I think that's a really valid point that needs to be made, that this is not something you just keep tight in a box and it's all done. And then you move on and suddenly you're 30, you're 35 and you're all done and you're better. But so all let's say, yes. So I started writing this book when I was pregnant with Noelle. I did the book proposal during that time, sent it off, got it rejected by 4 or 5 different publishers. But then I decided just to start writing it. And then I wrote it during the year that she was born. Because we lived in LA, I had to go back to work because we couldn't afford rent if I didn't work. So when she was 4 months old, I went back to work. And I really wrote this. I mean, it took me like 3 or 4 years to write this book. And I did it while I was teaching and taking care of her. While Dwayne went back to grad school, I was writing it. So I had it finished the summer before my son was born. I think that's how it works. I'm getting it's all kind of blending in there. But yeah, I sold it the Christmas before Nathan was born, and then I turned in the final sort of manuscript to them shortly thereafter. So anyway, yeah, it was like a good 4 or 5 year process of writing this book through all of life's ups and downs and everything.
Yeah. What I was reading your blog for was a lot. I was very much identifying a lot with some of the parenting issues that you were sharing in terms of Noelle and her personality, and who's very much like my daughter Emily, who is 8. And then your son, Nathan, he was born, let's see, he's like a year and a half or a little over.
Yes, that's right, because your son and my son are really close in age.
Yeah, it's like about a month apart or something like that.
Yeah.
So, how much time then? I mean, you're talking the span of you were pregnant with her, and then you finished it before him.
Yes.
So that's a span of what, 4 years or so?
Yeah.
To write a book.
I did, and I'll give you the nuts and bolts here. So it was when Noelle was a year old, I decided that I would try to, in between semesters of teaching, I had a good 2-month break from like Christmas break to when the classes start again. So, you know, you've heard of National NaNoWriMo, right?
Oh, yeah.
National Novel Writing Month. So I was like, you know what? If I had a friend who was teaching adjunct and writing, she did NaNoWriMo. And I was like, okay, if Carrie can do this, I'm going to give it a shot. Like, there's no reason for me not to try. So I decided that I was going to give myself 2 months. And I was going to pound out 50,000 words of this rough draft. So I did that. And then I put it aside and I was like, this is atrocious. I was like, this is the worst. This is never going anywhere. This is like the worst 50,000 words ever. And I just thought it was dead in the water. Then that fall, the next fall when I was teaching again, I started meeting with a consultant at one of the schools where I taught to help faculty get published. And I thought, well, I'll just see what he thinks about it. So I went and I told him the idea of my book. And he was like, oh, that's a great story. He's like, oh, yeah, you definitely need to write that. And he really put the wind in my sails to go back to it and look at it again. So I went back to it again. I saw the potential in it, and I saw what absolutely needed to be trashed. And so I went through and I cut out all the stuff that needed to be trashed. And I think I maybe had like 20,000 words left, you know. And then I started from there writing my first draft, and that took a year. And I did that while I was teaching. And, you know, we just sort of juggled it. Like when Dwayne was in school, when he wasn't in school, he would stay home with Noelle so that I could have extra time in the office to write. And I wrote a lot during nap times and bedtimes. I mean, that's when I had the time to do it. And then I sent that first draft out to a trusted group of 5 readers to read it to me, or read it and give me feedback. The feedback I got was, yeah, you need to rewrite this. It's not that good. This got a lot of significant weaknesses. Dr. Mary Brown, who was my English professor in undergrad and just the woman that really set fire to my love and passion for writing, I had asked her to read it. And in her very gracious and accurate way, she came back to me and said, you know what, your heart and soul comes through with this, but there are a lot of weaknesses here. And I was like, okay. So I took it and I said, all right, I'm going to rewrite it from the beginning, and I'm going to integrate the research into it. So by that point, we had moved from LA to Washington for Dwayne's first job, and I was pregnant with Nathan, and I was not working. So I just stayed home with Noelle that year that I was pregnant with Nathan, and that's what I did, is I rewrote the book from beginning to end. And the following year, I pitched it to Wesleyan Publishing House, and they bought it. So that was sort of the process. But again, I did all of that in nap times and bedtimes, and every now and then I would, you know, Dwayne would take Noelle and give me a Saturday morning so that I could write more. But I feel like, Eric, for me, I am more productive with the more structure I have. I was terrified before Noelle was born that I would never have any time to write. Now, I don't know what I did with all that time before she was born. I know I was fiddling it away. Because once she came onto the picture, suddenly my time became precious, and it became much more structured. And I just have learned that I don't wait for inspiration to write. If the time opens up in front of me, I sit down and I write. And it doesn't matter how good it feels or how bad it feels. I do it. And then I have at least something to work with that I can go back to and shape it. So I don't know if that's more information than you want, but that's the nuts and bolts of how I did this first book.
So it doesn't even matter how good or you know, as long as you're getting the words down, you can go back later and fix it.
Yes.
It's that you keep going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That has been a philosophy that has changed my writing career, and Anne Lamott writes about it in her book, Bird by Bird, and that really set me free. I think the key as a writer is you have to be able to acknowledge the mental battle that's going on and all those voices in your head that are trying to shut you down before you even get started. And that's been a huge thing for me. Is there are so many times I'll sit down to write and I will be like, this is the worst thing in the world. Mm-hmm. No one is ever going to, if anybody ever read this right now, I would be so embarrassed. But I just have Anne Lamott's voice in my head to just keep pushing forward. It doesn't matter how terrible it is. Just get it out there, because I can always come back later and shape it and refine it and edit it. But those are really 2 different processes. First, you just need to generate the material. Then you can go back and shape it.
Yeah. One of the things that I know you're not doing anymore, which you might do in the future, and I was privileged enough to take part of, was when you were doing individual online writing courses where you were teaching writing, and it was called The Blank Page. And through you working with the stuff that I was doing, which I just thought of that because you were saying this stuff was like, oh, this is horrible. I wrote some horrible stuff and then turned out to write one of the things I've been most pleased with ever, which was a kind of an experience of that my family had going through, or my perspective at least on it, of going through my brother having cancer when he was really young. And we were young in my family. But you're not doing it now, and I think that kind of attests to the fact that there are seasons, and you can't say yes to everything.
Yeah.
You have to say no to some things.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There are seasons, and I think being realistic with yourself about that, and also knowing that no is never indefinite. Like I probably will come back to the writing workshops eventually. I just right now, we're putting them on hold. And I was talking about this with one of my friends her name's Christin Taylor, and she wrote a book called A Beautiful Mess. She ahead of me, and she's really kind of been my good company through the experience of publishing and writing. And she's pregnant right now, and she was working on her second book. She's also getting her PhD, and she's teaching. And, for this season, she's put her book aside. And I think it's so healthy to do that, to give yourself permission to pick and choose things, and know that just because you put something down doesn't mean that you're never going to get back to it again. It just means that for now, it's not the right time for it. And I know she'll get back to her book eventually, and there will be a time that opens up for that. And she knows that too, and she feels good about it.
That kind of reminds me of almost a key, not to go spoiler about the book, piece in your journey near the end where you talk about in your starting to get out of or start to find land in the shipwreck, which was when you and Dwayne went on a marriage retreat and what you did when you did that.
Yes, we did the Gallup Strength Finders test. It was like a whole Strength Finders marriage retreat. We had to take this test before we went to find out what our top 5 strengths were. And then when we got to the retreat, we got to learn more about our own strengths and the other strengths and what they meant for us as a couple and individually. And it was a very enlightening weekend.
And if I'm correct, one of Dwayne's was responsibility. And you kept thinking, well, that should have been me.
Yes.
But then you kind of came to the revelation that his responsibility was because he was able to say no.
Yes. When he took it, he had communication and responsibility as one of his top 2 strengths. And I went, did you take this test for me? I was like, there's no way. I was like, you're always saying no to stuff. You're not responsible. I'm the one that's always taking on things. I'm responsible. Well, come to find out, responsibility, the strength of responsibility means you put your name to whatever you take on, and you take it very seriously. And so you don't start something you can't finish, and you can't finish it well. And so Dwayne, of course, was saying no, because he was looking at these things going, no, I can't do that and do it well. I'm not going to take it on. Whereas here's little old me taking on all this stuff and doing, a half-baked job at it or not getting it done and thinking I'm so responsible when actually he was the one that was truly responsible out of the 2 of us. So yeah, it was a good learning experience.
How many years had you guys been married at the time that happened?
Oh, I think it was like, I think it was like 5 years, 5 or 6. Yeah, I think it was 5 years.
Okay. I asked that because can you imagine how your shipwreck, how you may have been more prepared for your shipwreck had you done that Strength Finders, say, during marital counseling?
Yeah.
Entering into the marriage at that point. I mean, as I read that, I thought, dang it, I wish my wife and I had done that. That would have made perfect sense.
Yeah. I don't know. I think when we took that Strength Finders, it changed our life because we had gone through shipwreck. I don't know if we would have been as open to it if we had taken it earlier, because we were rattled and shaken up at that point, and we were hungry for that kind of information. I've met people that have taken Strength Finders in college, or they've taken it, in their 40s and 50s, and it doesn't seem to really have that big of an impact on them. And when I think back to why did that truly change our lives, I think it's because we were in a very vulnerable state when we took it. The rug had been ripped out underneath us, and we were searching for new meaning and purpose. And that test that weekend gave us, again, a new sort of language and vocabulary and a structure to begin to negotiate our future, making new meaning and finding new purpose for ourselves. So I don't know if it would have made as big a difference for us if we had taken it earlier.
Yeah, because maybe it's one of those things where you would have had it already, but it wouldn't have meant anything because you weren't in a place to really you weren't in a place of need to have to draw from those strengths.
Yes, yeah.
So...
yeah. And, maybe had I taken it earlier, I would have known a lot sooner that I wasn't cut out for the job I was doing at the time, which was in the film industry. So I don't know. I think it would have changed my story completely. But it is what it is now.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, as you are writing the book now, and you're a mother of two and a wife and teaching,
yes,
I'm going to ask you the question I ask everybody. In closing, in an ideal world, how would you start your day?
Oh, I love this question. In an ideal world, I would get up before the kids are up, do some yoga, go on to doing some prayer time, quiet time, reading my Bible. Christianity is my faith choice, so that's the way I would choose to meditate. And then, go on into the day, getting dressed, taking care of the kids, getting our breakfasts and everything. And then, going off to work, doing my thing. One of the best things that we did for me coming here to Gettysburg was, because I was working again, was being able to afford more childcare, which has allowed me the kind of space to be able to do my work, do my writing, but also, spend good time with the kids as well. So anyway, that is a great day for me, that I spend about 6 hours working, and then I get to spend the rest of the day with my kids and my family. I'm not distracted by the next essay or chapter that's in my head or the things that I need to grade. I get all that taken care of. I'm also an introvert, so I get a lot of energy from reading, writing, being quiet. So if have that, go to work, teach my classes, have that quiet time to read, do lesson preparation, grade, then I'm energized when I get home with the kids at 3 o'clock, and then we play, we do our thing, I make dinner, we spend the evening together. That is a perfect day for me.
Any kind of way, because I know for some people it's not necessarily as much about starting the day so much as setting the next day up the night before, or do you have any evening rituals?
My evening ritual is to pop myself some popcorn, sit on the couch after the kids go to bed and read a book. And just decompress. And then I try to make Noelle's lunch for the next day. I make sure my bag is packed if I'm going, Tuesdays and Thursdays I work from home, but on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, when I know I'm going to go into class the next day, I make sure my bag is packed and ready to go, that Noelle has her lunch ready. So it just takes a few things off my plate the next morning. But I remember reading someone say that if they could stay away from electronics from like 8 o'clock onwards, they would sleep better at night. Mm-hmm. And I have really found that to be true. So that's why I love that time of the day. The kids are in bed asleep, and Dwayne and I are at home relaxing. And then I try to deliberately not look at my cell phone or get on email from 9 o'clock onward, because I find it, my brain then kicks into gear and I'm thinking about all these things, and it's harder for me to get to sleep.
Well, I know that your book is coming out incredibly soon. It's actually for pre-sale on Amazon right now.
Yes.
And so I'll have a link to that in the show notes, which will be beyondthetodolist.com/21. And so people will be able to go check that out. But if you would also like for them to check where you are on the web, where would they go?
They could go to ChristinTaylor.com. And my name is spelt a little bit strange. It's spelled Christin, no E and no K. So it's ChristinTaylor.com.
Great.
And you can read more about the book. You can read my blog.
Awesome. Well, Christin, it's been great catching up with you. Thank you again for coming on the show. I really hope that people will, 1, check out the book, and 2, check out your site, and just really start to ponder what may be some things they weren't aware of that are roadblocks that are holding them back from dealing with maybe what could be a better life for them.
Yeah.
So,
I hope so too. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming. Well, thanks again for listening to another episode of Beyond the To-Do List. I hope that you were able to hear the transition and the talk from the theoretical into the practical, and maybe ponder some things you haven't thought about before in a different, style or area of doing work and being productive. And that it really does have a lot to do with where you are in life and what status or season you're in. And so I encourage you wholeheartedly to go to the show notes at beyondthetodolist.com/21 and check out the book and other show notes there. The link to Amazon where you can order it as well as other places. Maybe it's not for you, but you know of someone who could benefit from reading this. And maybe that's who you would pass it on to.